My guest is Noam Gilad. He's a student in British Columbia and a former IDF officer. Welcome to the show, Noam.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're not really a former officer because you're never former in the IDF. Is that correct?
That's true. Whenever I will come back to Israel, I will have to continue my service as reserve.
And what did you do in the Army?
Well, I joined a special program. It was a 20-month program in order to become an officer, a communication officer at one of the field units. So after I graduated, my first job I did at the paratroops. Most of the time I spent at the West Bank. A year I spent there. It was a very tough year, but I think I learned a lot. And then my second job, I came back and I was a part of the commanding staff at the officer course. So I was training the new officers, basically giving from my own experience, teaching them how to be an officer.
Now, my grandson is a paratrooper, and he said it was really scary jumping out of the plane. In fact, they pushed him.
It was. I was, I was lucky, twice to be the first guy that stands at the door for like 5 minutes. So the airplane is open, and you have to look at the green light and decide when to jump. And that's more difficult because the other guys are just, like you said, getting pushed, but you kind of need to do the first step and stand at the door for a couple of minutes. So
it was worse for you.
It was worse.
Now, but he said that other than those training jumps, he never jumped after that. That the real function of a paratrooper isn't really
that's
to
true.
jump from planes.
If I remember correctly, Israel used it once only in the history. But I actually did another one as a part of an army drill. So I did it 6 times.
Oh, 6 instead of 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're a student in BC. What are you studying?
I'm studying commerce and I'm majoring in finance.
And how did you get to Canada to become a student?
So after I was released from the army,
did you travel for a year?
I traveled like every other Israeli. I went to Thailand and South America.
I was going to say Thailand and South
America, yeah. And before I left, my dad told me that I had an option to become a permanent resident in Canada. So on my way back to Israel, I stopped at British Columbia at UBC, and it was sunny. So that was great.
You get the cold of Toronto when you have this.
So, I said, well, this is an interesting option and it will probably open a lot of doors. So I'll go and I'll do my degree and I'll decide if I want to stay after that.
Your father is a Canadian citizen?
No, they're fully Israeli.
So how could you become a permanent resident here?
I'm not too familiar with the whole procedure. But it's a very liberal country, open to immigration, I guess. So.
Now, I want to talk about your experience of the Army and the image of the Army. The IDF has an iconic role in Israeli society. It does a number of things. In your experience, what did it do?
Well, I think I learned a lot during my time as an officer at the paratroops. And it's funny because one of my best friends in Israel, he was an officer too, so while we were traveling, we had all kinds of conversations about the contribution of the Army to our future career. One of the most important things that I learned is time management, how to manage your time, how to deal with a difficult, stressful situation where, as you say, shit hits the fan, how are you gonna deal with it. And you learn to basically smile and move forward and continue with whatever you need to do. Management of people, leadership skills, also working as a part of a team. And all of those skills, I saw how they helped me when I work in clubs at university, leading a university club.
Which club do you lead?
Last year, I was the president of the Israeli Awareness Club at UBC. It's an Israeli advocacy club.
Oh, well, we'll get back to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's go back to the Army, though. So does it serve as an integrator from people from different roles and different societies, parts of society?
Yeah, definitely. I think that you make a lot of good connections with people that you might not know from all over the country. and great friendships. Some of my best friends I still keep in touch, that did the 20-month program with me. And so, yeah, I think it's a great bonding experience.
Now, the image of the IDF for Israelis is one thing because it's iconic, they criticize certain operations, but generally it's really has a very strong support in Israel. That's not the same as the image outside, so it relates to your role as an advocacy because you get incidents happening and people see the Israeli army as brutal and unreasonable, etc. I'm sure that's not your experience, but I'd like to see what your experience is and how do you handle the discrepancy between how you experience the army and how it's portrayed outside of Israel.
Yeah, well, I will tell you from my experience, the first lesson that you learn in boot camp is basically about the ethical code of the army and the values. And they give you this little notebook with with the ethical code, and you have to keep it in your pocket during your whole service.
Some of the things in the ethical code, for example, about
purity of arms.
But what about protecting civilians? What does it say about that?
Well, it says that you can't use, there is a purity of arm, you can't use any force of you have to, you can't use force in an unethical way. And one of the values is the human life. So I think it's very important, and people are not aware of that level of humanity that the army acts upon. I was lucky. I have friends that are F-16 pilots, and they told me stories how they had to abort an important mission. They had to basically fire a missile at a booby trap in Gaza before another paratroops platoon walks there. And because 5 seconds before they saw people there, they had to abort the mission, and they put our own people at risk. So these stories, that reality, and the fact that the army, everything he does, he thinks twice about the risk for civilians. People are not aware of the full picture and all the measurements that we take.
Did you have a legal ethical officer assigned to your unit?
You have an education officer in every unit, we call it. And you have discussions, and people, even when they, let's say, a very common task is a checkpoint. Before you go on a checkpoint, you have to do a day of training, basically, how to deal with civilians. And I have a lot of respect for those soldiers that are standing there 8 hours straight for a year and are patient, and even after every second day we catch someone trying to smuggle a bomb or something into Israel.
Every second day.
And it's not always, obviously it doesn't get to the news, but I remember being there, in the headquarters next to Shechem, and we would hear every a couple of days, we'd hear a boom, and you ask what it was, and someone, they found a bomb trying to be smuggled. And people don't talk about that. And I can give you an example. When I was a communication officer, I was in charge of installing basically a device that helps to make the checkpoints more efficient. So basically the Israeli army is investing all this money in making it easier for the civilians, so they don't need to stand in long lineups and get frustrated, because it's part of our mission. As it was on my board, part of my unit's mission was to, first of all, protect the Israeli civilians, but also make sure, there's an ordinary way of living for the Palestinian civilians. So we invest a lot of money, and that's a part of our mission. And I think what the bottom line is that people need to understand, in this difficult reality, Israel is making, and the IDF is making its best effort to remain humanitarians. And that's the bottom line here.
Well, I want to take a break, but when we come back, the thing I want to discuss is the other image abroad of the IDF as opposed to how you experience the IDF. But we'll break now and come back to that question.